is March 8, 2013. It's the 40-year anniversary of one of the most significant moments of my lifetime, probably yours too. What happened in 1983 on this date? This will remind you. Watch.
History teaches anything. It teaches that simple-minded appeasement or wishful thinking about our adversaries is folly. It means the betrayal of our past, the squandering of our freedom. So I urge you to speak out against those who would place the United States in a position of military and moral inferiority. You know, I've always believed that old Screwtape reserved his best efforts for those of you in the church. So in your discussions of the nuclear freeze proposals, I urge you to beware the temptation of pride, the temptation of blithely declaring yourselves above it all, and label both sides equally at fault, to ignore the facts of history and the aggressive impulses of an evil empire, to simply call the arms race a giant misunderstanding, and thereby remove yourself from the struggle between right and wrong and good and evil.
Boy, I miss statesmanship. I miss a robust American foreign policy. I missed a grown-up who can actually deliver a speech like that in the White House. But they don't come along that often. That's why you take a moment and recognize a day like this. Yeah, the evil empire's speech. Let's bring in Craig Shirley, the foremost biographer of Ronald Reagan, including his book, Rendezvous with Destiny, which is my personal favorite of the collection. Craig, thanks for joining us on this important date.
Oh, Larry, thank you so much. It's good to be with you.
I think the story behind this speech is almost as intriguing as the speech itself. I want to get to that, but set the stage. Where did he deliver this important speech? And I think it's important to point out when he talks about, you know, the opposition to his policy, the people who had fooled themselves into thinking that the arms race was a big misunderstanding. Senator Joe Biden was one of those guys back then. He was on the wrong side of this debate. Go ahead, Craig.
Of course he was. Of course he was. Biden's always been on the wrong side of history. The speech was given in Florida. It was given before the National Association of Evangelicals. And I think the setting is just as important as the content of the speech itself, because he wasn't just talking about the arms race or the Soviet nuclear buildup, but he was talking about the clarity and the morality between the United States and the evil empire, the Soviet Union. And he had no hesitation in saying we were good and they were evil. Yeah. And the forces of good have to be very strong and have to be very careful when confronting the forces of evil. He was the first president to really talk about the Soviet Union in a manner that the American people understood and the world agreed with. That they were, you know, just don't forget, they had just invaded Afghanistan. They were continuing their military buildup. They had Eastern Europe. They had the Warsaw Pact. Their influence was growing around the world. And unfortunately, under Jimmy Carter, we were losing the Cold War. Only with Reagan do we begin to turn the tide and eventually win the Cold War. But it was touch and go up until Reagan became president.
And Craig, you know, the instinct to steer away from the idea the foreign policy debates are good versus evil, it's so ingrained here in Washington, D.C., in the State Department, in the Senate. Oh, you know, they're above it all. They're much more intellectual than that. Talk about how important it was for him to reframe this debate in those terms. Also, by the way, I want to point out, this was just, a little over 2 years into his presidency, where all the political people were whispering in his ear that, you know, just take it easy, be careful, be cautious, yes, because you want to get reelected.
Yeah, right. No, that's exactly right. I was there when it was going on, Larry. You know, you mentioned that today's State Department, well, we're intellectual. Well, Reagan, you know, was very literary. He quoted from C.S. Lewis. He quoted from the Screwtape.
Oh, I was going to mention that the Screwtape reference. I had never caught that before. Of course, Screwtape represents Satan in the C.S. Lewis book.
Exactly. You know, and of course the book, you know, about Wordsworth and instructing him on how how to be evil and how to turn people and how to seduce people and things like that. But you know, Reagan actually read C.S. Lewis. Reagan actually read about 5 newspapers a day and 1 book a week. His old aide, Marty Anderson, who was a friend of mine, he himself had PhDs and masters from Ivy League schools, and he once told me he estimated Reagan's IQ to be 175. Wow. So Reagan himself was a true intellectual. Smarter than the people running the State Department today.
Craig, there was a big fight behind the scenes about this. Isn't there a story, is it apocryphal, you would know better than anyone, that the drafts going back and forth, Reagan kept putting it in. Reagan kept putting Evil Empire in there, and people kept scratching it out?
Yeah, no, well, it happened it happened 3 times actually in his career, where the striped pants set, tried to take out Evil Empire, and Reagan kept putting it back in. The same thing happened too during the 1980 campaign. He wanted to call the war in Vietnam a noble cause, and the moderates around him said, you can't say that, Governor. You can't say that. It's going to cause consternation. But Reagan wanted to push buttons. So he went out there. They took it out of the speech 3 or 4 times, and he put it back in 3 or 4 times. And then he went out there and gave the speech. It was in the fall of the 1980 campaign, and the nervous Nellies around him feared it was going to, upset the momentum of the campaign. But in fact, it increased his momentum, because he said what the American people needed and wanted to hear, that Vietnam was a noble cause, that fighting against communist totalitarianism was a good thing. The same thing happened, of course, with the Berlin Wall speech, where he said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." And again, they tried to take it out. Reagan put it back in.
Some of his most legendary and consequential lines, and of course, all the smart set in Washington wouldn't have any of it. So, Craig, what about on the other side of the equation? When the Kremlin, they monitor every syllable that a president mentions publicly and probably privately with their spies. When they see President Ronald Reagan call them the evil empire, I mean, they must have recognized from that moment on, game over.
They went to battle stations. It was a 5-alarm fire inside the Kremlin. Is that all during the 70s, when Reagan was governor and then former governor, and he was making his case against the Soviet Union, the Soviets actually hired 2 propaganda agencies, the Center and Service A, to spread worldwide propaganda agencies to spread disinformation about Reagan. And in a very important book about the Cold War called The Sword and the Shield, the Soviet Union described Reagan as the most dangerous enemy they ever had. That's what the Soviet Union said about Ronald Reagan. So that, in my mind and in your mind, Larry, that would be a good thing. If we're the enemy of the evil empire, then we're good, right?
Yeah, of course.
That's what they said about Ronald Reagan.
It's the side you want to be on. I gotta ask, you're his biographer. You got to witness all of this firsthand. You've written at least 4 books on Reagan.
6, actually.
I'm so sorry.
6. That's okay.
That's right. Can't keep track. Do you still do what I do? I start watching like that video. I'll watch that on YouTube or Rumble or whatever, and then I'll start following video after video after video. I'll get lost for over an hour just watching Reagan, just remembering, just feeling good about a time where we had a president like that.
Me too, especially in the modern context. We've got this pipsqueak moron in the White House, and then then you watch a real president. That's why, Larry, in my mind, one of the best books I ever read about Ronald Reagan was by a liberal professor, John Patrick Diggins. The name of the book is I can't think of the name of the book, but he wrote that our 4 greatest presidents were Washington, Lincoln, FDR, and Ronald Reagan, because according to him, they all saved or freed many, many people. And I think what better criteria could you find for a president than to save lives or to free people?
Amen to that. There's also something to be said for clarity. At any given time, even if you disagreed with Ronald Reagan, there was no guesswork about where he stood on the most important issues of our time. And honestly, I don't think you can say the same about our current situation, Craig Shirley.
No, you can't. No. You can't at all. Reagan, it was very clear where he stood. You were with him or you were against him, but he made it very clear. He didn't obfuscate or hide behind polling data or something like that. There are many times where in his career, as as well as anybody, is that he told the political pollsters, I don't care what you're telling me. Is that I'm going to say what I believe. I'm going to say what I feel in my heart.
40 years later, this speech still holds up as the iconic moment that it is. And frankly, we could use a president delivering a very similar speech at a similar time that we're living in now. Thank you, Craig. More to come on O'Connor Tonight.